New so-called tenant protections in the state of Colorado would allow the state to decide how landlords operate their business, how much they can charge for rent, and who they can or cannot remove from their properties. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today. It's going over proposed new tenant protections in the state of Colorado. Right now, I think it's a joke, okay? You know what? There's already a lot of rules and regulations in place in the state of Colorado to protect tenants from those bad actors, right? But what these new rules do is, right, they give tenants special rights and privileges that they do not deserve, okay? Like, for example, they take away the property rights from the property owners in deciding who can and cannot remain in their property. And they give those rights to the tenant, or the state themselves are the ones who decides, hey, who can or can't be evicted or removed from a property. That's ridiculous, okay? Oh man, this stuff is frustrating because I keep seeing it come up, all right? They have these, what they call just cause eviction laws. And basically a landlord has to only be able to evict people if they fall within a certain small category, and they leave a lot of stuff out. Okay, there's a lot of good reasons why landlords want to remove tenants from their properties that aren't listed, yet they think, oh, well, they're just being evil. No, it's our property. We're the ones who decide who can live there and who can't. If I signed a 1-year lease with a tenant, and then after that year, for any reason, I don't want that tenant to stay any longer, well, guess what? You gotta go. Okay, you got to find somewhere else to live. That is the term that you agreed to. And if you tell me that the state is, oh, well, the tenant now can decide if they want to stay or not, well, that tells me that the lease is useless. Okay, why did we even waste our time signing a lease? They've basically destroyed our contract and made it pointless. Okay, it's idiotic. The landlords who want to stay in business and want to continue to rent to tenants, they should be allowed to do so. But those landlords who want to get out of the business for any reason and don't want to rent to those tenants again, if I have a tenant who looks at my wife a funny way, okay, think about that for a second. Like looks at my wife like she's a piece of garbage, right? I'm not renting to that tenant again. That tenant's done. But I don't care if they continue to pay the rent. You looked at my wife in a disrespectful manner, and I don't want to rent to you anymore. So I'm just not going to renew your lease. Hey, you know what? That's perfectly fine, and that should be legal. But no, not in the state of Colorado. Not with this new proposal they're coming up with. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below and let me know what you think. Are there a lot of good reasons why landlords might not want to renew the lease for their tenant? They call it, oh, well, you need just cause eviction. You can't evict. Once again, I'm going to mention this, right? It is not an eviction when you decide not to renew somebody's lease. That's just a lease non-renewal. You're just telling the people, hey, you can't stay here any longer. And the landlord doesn't need any reason. It shouldn't need any reason. Simply put, you signed a 1-year lease. If you signed a longer lease, or if you came up with different terms, that's something that we can talk about. If the landlord decides they want to break the contract that they signed with you, but I don't see any problem with a landlord saying, hey, I only want a tenant in this house for a year, and then I'm going to sell it, then I'm going to move in, or then I'm going to use it for storage for my guitar collection, or whatever the landlord wants to do. It's their property. It does not belong to the tenant and never did. Oh man, anyway, let's get into this article and see what it says. This article is coming from CPR.org, and it says, if your lease expires, you could still keep renting under Colorado's Just Cause Evictions Bill. Yeah, let's get into this article. I'll let you know what I think as we go through. A bill advancing through the Colorado legislature would make it easier for renters to stay in their homes even after their lease expires, and it also would give them other protections against eviction. The very first paragraph there, it says, well, you can stay in your home even after the lease expires. Like, well, the lease is a contract. So you're telling me that the tenant now basically can just decide however long they want to stay regardless of what the contract says. Like I said, this destroys our contract rights, but let me continue. Currently, when a lease ends, the landlord can decide whether the tenant gets to stay. For example, they could simply refuse to offer a renewal of the current lease, forcing the tenant to leave or be evicted. Yeah, they own the property. So why wouldn't the landlord, like, it's my house. I don't want you to stay here any longer. Please leave. They act like there's something wrong with that. Okay, you own this house, okay? And you're like, you know what? You signed a 1-year contract for you to stay, and I don't want you to stay here any longer. Why? Well, I just don't. Just don't. Okay, but I paid the rent on time and everything. Yeah. You completed your side of the agreement, and I completed my side of the agreement, which was a 1-year term. And I should not be obligated to extend that just because you want to stay longer. That system makes it too easy for landlords to get rid of renters, even if the renters have done nothing wrong, says Representative Javier Mabry, a Democratic sponsor of the bill, HB 231171. When their leases are up, the landlord refuses to offer a new lease, Mabry said at a committee hearing on Wednesday. We're trying to prevent that kind of retaliation. Retaliation? Even if, see, the first question is, right, when you have the just cause eviction, the state is the one who decides what a just cause is. And if they don't include every possible scenario, which there's infinite, right? There's infinite number of scenarios why you wouldn't, that a landlord might not want to renew a lease. So if they don't include the specific scenario that the landlord has, then guess what? Now, the landlord is not allowed to not renew that lease. So what's going to happen in a situation where we have these rules in place? Landlords are going to start lying. That's the first thing. A lot of landlords are just going to say, you know what? These are the 10 specific reasons or however many reasons that they say that we can evict. Well, we're still going to remove this tenant, but we're going to use one of these excuses there. Okay, so if they say, oh, well, the landlord can remove the tenant or, not renew the lease if they plan on selling it and getting out of the landlord business. And the landlord's like, yeah, I plan on selling it and getting out of the landlord business, right? He puts removes the tenant, doesn't put it up for sale, or maybe even puts it up for sale, but puts it at a price so high that nobody ever wants to buy it. And then he pulls it off the market within like a couple weeks, and he's like, well, didn't sell, so I guess I'll put another tenant in there. I'm just saying that there's going to be a lot of people, and they're going to find ways around these rules. They're going to use the rules to their advantage and still accomplish the goal that they intended on, which was to remove that tenant, whether they think this is going to protect tenants or not, right? And the only thing this is really going to do, and I've mentioned this every time I read a anti-landlord law, right? It's going to catch, there's going to be small mom and pop landlords who get caught up in this nonsense. They're the ones who, they might not know all of the ins and outs of the current laws that have passed recently or whatever, right? So imagine you have a small mom and pop landlord. They own one single family rental. And it's a home they used to live in. And guess what? They decide, hey, I'm not going to renew the lease for this tenant, right? So the tenant, they're like, hey, we're not going to renew the lease. We're not going to allow you to stay. But they don't give a reason. And the tenant goes and they go to the state. The state either fines or sues or whatever and punishes the heck out of this landlord who only owns one house. And this kind of scenario gets repeated over and over again until you force those small mom and pop landlords out of business. They're like, you know what? The state doesn't want me to operate here, and they treated me like crap. And guess what? I'm not going to offer my property for rent anymore. So what we'll see tenants unable to find as many rental properties as before. The result is that the prices are going to go up. And that's ridiculous. So the other thing is, of course, they're going to try to tie rent control to all of this. They're going to be like, hey, you know what? They're going to say, oh, well, landlords won't be able to raise their rents up higher, because that's probably retaliatory. Listen, they always try to tie rent control to these just cause eviction laws. Under the new proposal, some of the power would shift to the tenant. In many cases, landlords would essentially be required to offer a renewal of the lease in substantially identical terms. If they failed to do so, renters could keep paying rent under the terms of the previous lease, and they would be protected from eviction. Yeah, so you know, no new terms for the lease. If it says right there, you have to have substantially identical terms. Like, hey, that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. Okay, let the land. You're throwing our contracts into the garbage. You're making our leases pointless. Goodness, do these people even know how dumb this sounds? I mean, we have a contract for a time period, right? It's kind of like when you go and rent a car, and you're like, hey, I want to continue to rent the car beyond the end of the term that you agreed to, right? Well, it might actually cost you more, or the terms of the service might change because this wasn't part of the original contract that you signed. It blows my mind that these people are so idiotic that they cannot understand that, hey, this is the way the businesses have to operate. Simply put, mom and pop, small landlords are the ones who are going to suffer the most under this sort of proposal. Now, let me skip down a little bit because they talk a little bit about the rent protections that they're trying to throw in there. And it says, the proposal would allow landlords to make a reasonable rent increase when they renew the lease. But Mabry said that was not meant to act as a form of rent control. Yeah, so you can only make a reasonable rent increase. Who decides what reasonable is? The government or the tenant? Simply put, I know there's some people who'd be like, hey, $10 a month? Oh my God, that's not reasonable. I can't afford that. Yeah, well, like I said, when the government is making the decisions instead of the landlord, guess what happens? There's going to be less rental housing available. There's going to be a lot more expensive housing because there's going to be a shortage, and it's going to be bad overall for both landlords and tenants. So, yeah, I think this is a garbage proposal. I hope it doesn't pass, but who knows? Who knows? We're seeing a lot of anti-landlord laws passing all over the country.